So, welcome everyone. I love being able to see a bunch of people that I know here. As he said, for those of you that don't know me, I do the magic show here in town. But I was actually born and raised kind of in this area. Actually, Telluride was the town that in high school, we used to ditch high school and we'd sneak up to Telluride because it was far away enough that we could get away with it and no one would catch us. So I've always had this affinity for coming up to Telluride. I'm married. I have 2 daughters. My wife and I just celebrated our 18th wedding anniversary, which was super fun. And then I have 2 daughters. I think we have a picture of my family here. I want to introduce you to them. We'll put them up. So this is my family. My wife, Megan, next to me, my oldest daughter, Gabby, and then my youngest daughter, Jessie. They are 13 and 9. This is a little better picture of them here. So Gabby and Jessie. Gabby is my oldest. As you can see, she has red hair. She has these big blue eyes, kind of light, pale skin, and she's tall. She's super tall, 5'10", almost 5'11" at this point. Even when she was younger, the doctors knew she was going to be tall, so they were guessing about 6 foot, which is maybe where she was going to end up. And so as a dad, I'm like, man, I'm going to have this 6 foot tall, red hair, blue-eyed, pale-skinned daughter. There's like only 2 things that can come out of this. Either A, she's going to be a supermodel, or B, she may end up looking like Shrek. Like, it's one of the 2. Unfortunately, I think it's the first one. I was kind of pulling for Shrek because I've worked with middle school guys enough that, that may have been helpful. My youngest daughter, Jessie, she is a firecracker. I think she is a middle school boy trapped in a 9-year-old girl's body. She thinks farts and butt cheeks are the funniest thing in the world. Like, she is just crazy. She loves playing soccer, Ninja Warrior type stuff. She is wild. But those are my 2 girls. And so there is nothing in life, I think, that changes you more than having kids. And it doesn't matter how often someone tries to explain that to you, like having kids will change you. When you experience it, it's something completely different, right? It changes everything about how you operate. For me, I was a night owl. I'm like, I will always be a night owl. There's no way. Kids will never change me. Da, 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 da. Now I'm like, we can't start a show. Like, it's 8 p.m. Like, I got to go to bed, right? Like, that's just how it is. And simple tasks like walking to the coffee shop used to be kind of an easy thing. You walk the 2 blocks, you kind of politely wave at people as you're going by in your pre-coffee zombie state. Okay, all right. Get your coffee, life is good. But after kids, that same walk takes twice as long at least because you've got like 3 stops along your way, You've got the kid that's got to look at the bug and show that to you. You've got the other kid that's telling the stranger about how they just peed their pants. And then you have the complete and epic meltdown when you get to the door and your 2-year-old finds out they can't have caffeine. Like, that's all part of the process now, right? And as parents, we start to celebrate things, right, that we wouldn't have celebrated before. We celebrate a lot of first. So we celebrate, the first time they sleep through the night. That's a big thing, right? For one of my kids, that was after 2 weeks. For my other kid, that was after 6 years. So for some of you parents with little kids, I apologize. That may be in your future, right? Praying for the 2 weeks for you. But we celebrate things like first words, we celebrate those. We celebrate first birthdays, mostly because I think we're excited we kept a human being alive for 12 months, right? We celebrate that. But the big one is the first step, right? Rolling over, crawling, those things are exciting, but mostly that just makes more work for you because now you have to keep track of them like they're mobile. But first step is a big thing, and we celebrate the freedom that comes with that first step. We wait for it. We get excited every time, that wobble, wobble, fall. Not today. And we have our cameras ready now. We all have those out, so we're waiting for the first steps. We get excited. We celebrate those. I actually have both of my daughters' first steps I want to show you videos. So this is Gabby, right? Yay! That's Gabby. And then we have Jessie's here, too. So I don't know about this. All right. Nope, I like my chair. Oh, there it is. So, first steps, right? Those are a big deal. And taking just one step is exactly what I want to talk to you all about this morning. Um, if any of you have seen the masterpiece Groundhog Day with Bill Murray, right? There's a line in that movie that Needle-Nosed Ted says about, hey, watch that first step. It's a doozy. Yeah, some of you guys are with me, right? And that may be the exact same thing for us today. This first step may be a doozy for some of us. So as a magician, one of the things that I get asked probably more than anything else is, how do you come up with the tricks and the things that are in your show? How do you come up with that stuff? And for me, it happens one of two ways. The first way, I often describe it like being a musician. You know, as a musician, you have the notes, you have the chords, you have the scales, all of those things. You know how those work together, and it's just about how you piece them together to make your thing. For a magician, I know the moves, I know the gimmicks, I know the things that I can work with, and I try to figure out, okay, what's the best way I can put those things together to make them my own and use them? That's one way. The second way, which is much harder, is you dream or you have this idea of something you want to create, and you work your way backwards from there to try to create that thing. For example, if you've seen the show, there's a thing in my show where a card ends up in a wine bottle, okay? And this whole process started because I was doing a show at a winery, and I knew I wanted the picture of a card inside a wine bottle at that winery. That's all I knew at that point. And so from there, it was working backwards to try to figure out how to create this thing. And this is also a lot about how I live my life. I have always been a dreamer. I love thinking about the future and what it looks like, and then trying to work my way backwards to figure out how to create that thing with my family, with my job, with my career, with ministry, any of those things. That's kind of how I work through life. Well, as you all know, in 2020, a global pandemic hit, and it made that almost impossible to live out your life that way. It was incredibly difficult for me. Overnight, I lost my dream job. I very clearly remember the Friday night we were at the Madeleine. It was supposed to be a sold-out show. It was about 50%. Then we came up Saturday, and it was down to about 15%. Of the people that were supposed to be there were there. And at that point, the ski resort was like, we're not shutting down, we're going to be okay. Sunday, boom, doors closed, right? And so for me, all of a sudden, I had no way of dreaming about what my future was going to look like. There were questions that would be asked that used to be easy questions to answer, and now it was like, I don't know. I just don't know. And during that time, I kept coming back to one particular verse over and over again. For those 18 months, I would come back to this verse in Matthew. And if you've been around the church for a while, I know you've heard this verse. It's the story of Peter walking on water, right? And so I would come back to this and read it over and over again. And so I want to actually read this to you guys today as well. So Peter, one of Jesus' disciples, one of his closest friends, Peter was a fisherman that Jesus said, hey, come and follow me. And so they are on the side of a lake, and Jesus had just finished teaching. And he tells his disciples, hey, take the boat, go out. I'm going to get rid of the rest of the people. We're going to clear them out, then I need some time by myself. And so Jesus tells his disciples to get in the boat and go to the other side, and he dismisses the crowd. And after he dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Now later that night he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because of the wind against it. And so shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. And when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. They said, it's a ghost. They cried out in fear, which I get this, right? Like some people are like, how did they not know it was Jesus? Like you're seeing something for the first time in your life, and it's a person, a figure, walking across the lake. Like I'm going to freak out a little. Like I'm a magician. I've seen some weird things. That's going to creep me out, right? So I'm going to be weird. And so they're freaking out. And Jesus says to them, take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. Peter's response here is one of the strangest things to me. It took me a lot of years to realize why Peter says this. But Peter replies to him. He says, Jesus, if that's you, tell me to come out onto the water. And to me, when I was reading this when I was younger, I was like, why? Why doesn't he just say, hey, Jesus, if that's you, prove it. Like, tell me something. Instead, he says, Jesus, if that's you, let me walk out there. And what I found out was, during this time, if you were someone that was following a rabbi, which is exactly what Jesus' disciples were doing, they were following Jesus, the rabbi. When Jesus came to them and said, come, follow me, in that time, that really meant, hey, I think you've got what it takes to do what I do. So follow me and do what I do. And so Peter is taking that call from Jesus literally. He's saying, if you can do that, you have said that I could do that, so I want to do what you're doing. And he says, all right, tell me to come out onto the water. And Jesus says, come on. And so Peter gets out of the boat and walked on water towards Jesus. So during 2020, I also restored a pontoon boat that my dad had given me. It was my project during that time. And my pontoon boat, when it sits in the water, is probably about 18 inches to 24 inches from the deck to the surface of the water. So when I picture this moment, in my mind, that is what I am picturing. And there's no way that Peter could have gingerly done this, right? Like when you go to the pool and you're like dipping your toe in the water to test the temperature, that would not have been an option in this case. He would have been standing on the edge of the boat and would have had to step off the edge of the boat, right? And it would have been a full-on commitment to that moment. And I cannot imagine the instant that his foot hit the ground and felt pushback from the water, right? Like, I would have been giddy at that point, like, oh. Like if you've seen Bruce Almighty, like when he starts, that's me. Like I would have been like, oh, like this is awesome. And then he starts walking on the water towards Jesus. He sees the wind, he gets afraid, and he begins to sink. And he says, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. And he said, you of little faith, why did you doubt? And then they climbed in the boat, the wind died down, and those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. Now, if you've been around church for a while, you often, when people share this verse, they focus on the part of that story where Peter starts to sink. And they talk about our lack of faith and how when we're in the middle of a storm, we need to trust Jesus. And those are all good things. But I want to focus on the fact that Peter did something no other human outside of Jesus has ever done. He got the opportunity to walk on water, right? Like I can imagine him and his buddies, sitting around a campfire after Jesus was gone, sharing all the stories about what Jesus had done and the moments they had shared with him. And they're, because they're guys, there'd be that moment where they'd be like, Peter, you remember that time that you sunk in the water because you were afraid? Like, you sucker, you got so wet, like all that. And Peter would just get this moment of like, yeah, but that first step was incredible. Like it's that moment when you're at a party and you've got all the guys around, talking and they're bragging one-upping each other like, oh yeah, I did this. And Peter's just sitting back there. Yeah, but, like I got this thing. And so there's this moment where he gets to do something that no one else had ever done. Now, I think a lot of us fall into the same kind of steps that Peter did. Number one, it starts with the fear of unknown, right? So Peter's on the boat. He does not know what's coming towards him. And so he's afraid of that. How do we proceed from this moment in a moment of fear and the unknown? They don't recognize Jesus. And I think a lot of times I hear more often than not from high school, college age kids that I work with, like, how do we know the voice of God? How do we know what we're supposed to do? How do we hear Jesus? How do we follow Jesus? And the fact is, they don't spend enough time with him to recognize him when he shows up. And they're not looking for those moments. They question his calling to them because Jesus says, come on. And you know Peter was like, I don't know about this. Like, you know he was afraid of that moment. I also love the fact that in this story, Jesus does not get mad at him for his lack of faith, right? There is no moment in there where Jesus is like, you know what? You just don't trust me enough. He is embracing him and celebrating the fact that he was following him, but it is never like a reprimand thing for his lack of faith. So I can remember when I was younger, I used to rollerblade a lot. And I'm not talking about like the tight spandex, like, you know, not that stuff. But like the jump on rails, half pipes, like that was one of the main reasons we always came up to Telluride was when I was in high school, because you all had a covered skate park. And so all of our skate parks would get covered in snow, and so we would come up to Telluride. And I very distinctly remember the first time I ever dropped in on a half pipe. I was actually with my youth pastor at the time. His name was Eric. He was, at that time, I was like, he was an old guy. He was like 30, right? And we were playing roller hockey. And we were at this skate park that had a roller hockey rink, and we got done, and we were talking about going down the half pipe. And he's like, all right, here's the deal. He's like, I will jump off the half pipe from the top clear to the bottom if you just drop in on it. And I'm like, dude, you're going to break a hip. Like, this is going to be awesome. And so he gets up there, and sure enough, he jumps off the top, lands at the bottom of the half pipe, and rolls away. And I'm like, oh, dang. Now I actually have to do this, right? And so I get to the edge of the half pipe, and when you're on rollerblades, the idea is you put the edge of the half pipe right between the two middle wheels. And then really, you just have to lean so far forward, it feels like you're going to fall on your face. Because if you lean too far back, at the bottom, your feet will kick out, you land on your butt, you hit your head. It's a bad scenario. And so I can remember standing on that edge and that first step that I had to take, and the absolute fear in my gut, and then when you actually roll out, it's like this incredible moment. And I can remember my buddies that were there, you know, jumping and screaming and celebrating, and Eric's cheering, and we're like, yes, this is awesome. And I think this sometimes is where we miss it as a church, as followers of Jesus. It only takes one step of faith in following Jesus should be worthy enough for us to celebrate. And in a room like this, in a packed house, that one step is going to look very different for a lot of people in this room. For some of you, taking one step of faith is going to be, I just need to find out more about who this guy Jesus really is. For other people, it may be the commitment to say, I'm actually going to start following Jesus for the rest of my life. Others of you, it may be stuff at home. You know, admitting you're wrong in a marriage. Guys, that's a tough first step, right? It can look different for a lot of people. Some of you may be feeling this call to like, hey, how do I get more involved? How do I help reach my community? How do I take the next step? And don't miss the calling from Jesus to that. Don't miss and not recognize what God is trying to do in your life. But here's the thing. This week, July 4th week, is a week full of celebrations, right? There's a party, there's a parade, there's barbecues, there's all those things. I think, personally, us as followers of Jesus should be doing the same thing anytime we see someone in our community take a step of faith. Right? You have someone for the first time, they're like, hey, I asked a friend of mine to come to church for the first time. They didn't show up, but I asked them. We should be throwing a party for that. Like, we should be having a barbecue. We should be celebrating that because they just did something that took faith and stepping out of the boat. We need to be celebrating more. We need to be excited about when people in our community are taking steps of faith to move closer to Jesus. So I don't know what that looks like for you this week, but I hope you look for moments to recognize that. Look for moments where you can take one step, and look for moments where you can celebrate those around you as they take those steps. I'm going to pray for us to close this out tonight. Thank you for letting me be a part of this. It really is special to be here this morning. So let me pray.